Why don't I just do a few housekeeping things? So we're on an open Zoom forum. The idea is that this is a participatory discussion that we're going to have today. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to chat, to unmute, to just go ahead and ask us for the details. I'm not going to be able to answer any questions. There's a lot of people though who can answer all of the technical questions around the measures that we're going to be talking about today. I will do a bit of an introduction to get us started, allow a few other people to join, and kind of just dive a little bit into where we are, the history of National EMS Quality Alliance, and just give a brief overview of where we are. This is our agenda. I'm going to give the overview on the top of this agenda. Then I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Jeff Jarvis, who's the chairman, the chair of the Measure Development Committee. We have on the call a few people who really make NEMSQA work. Cherie Murphy is our executive director, who keeps us honest, keeps us moving forward, and really supports the work of this organization to do the work that we actually do. Kelly Burleson is our measure development specialist, who is the backbone of the National EMS Quality Alliance. And really, I think, wait, don't go too fast. I'm just still doing an introduction. We have, just a few people that I also want to thank who do the work of the National EMS Quality Alliance. It's really the board that are from member organizations throughout the EMS community. It's from our friends and support at ASEP that we also have a lot of work has been done to start this organization. It's from our corporate sponsors. It's from from NHTSA, from Jeff Kramer and Eric Cheney and the group at NHTSA made this successful.
He's pretty sweet.
I'd ask everybody to go on mute just while we're doing the intro. I will invite your questions shortly. And then just a word about Jeff Jarvis. He's a brilliant mind, and he's going to take us through some of the details of the measures. He's an academic and an operational leader in EMS, and excited to present with him today. If we go to the timeline, so this timeline starts in 2017, but it's really the work that's been going on for over a decade, really related to measure development in EMS, and the EMS Compass efforts. Our partners at NEMSQA and in the federal government, who and partners throughout the EMS world, who really kind of established the foundation that we work upon every day. It's really important to talk about NEMSIS as well. Our folks at NEMSIS, I know Jeff is going to get into the details of the close working relationship we have with Clay Mann and Josh Legler, and the team at NEMSIS. As you see over the last, it's really around the 2.5 years that we've been doing the work of measure development in EMS. And, I'm going to talk through a few of the specifics around the work that we are doing. But today is really dedicated to the core work of the National EMS Measure Set, the 11 measures that we derived from the EMS Compass work, and making them fit into today's NEMSIS environment, making sure that they're solid quality measures. This is something that happens in the measure development community, and every measure set, whether it's in the hospital, whether it's with a subspecialty. And so we are doing this work as well as a way to ensure that we're capturing what we want to capture when we design and deploy EMS quality measures. So we were found, essentially we were established as a 501c6 in 2019, and we worked on the measure set to release the national measure set in 2019, and then in 2020, obviously COVID COVID hit us all, but we've been working with the state of Florida to develop on the FAIR project, which has really given us an opportunity to partner with some great folks, Steve McCoy, Ken Shepke, Mike Hall at Florida State, to think about new and additional measures. As we go through the next few years, I think that those measures that we've worked on will also kind of start to percolate into the national mindset as well. And then a few other things I'd just like to mention related to the work that we're doing. The partnerships that we have established and within our member organizations and outside of it, it's really important to conceive of the EMS measure world really within a couple of frameworks. And the most important one that I think is true is really making sure that EMS sits at the table related to systems of care as an equal partner, and to ensure that we have the ways to capture the work that EMS does in the care of critical patients. And so we've been working with the American College of Surgeons on trauma-related measures, which is exciting. We've been working with AHA to establish real strong connections around the Mission Lifeline measure set. And our goal is really to integrate that and make it a useful tool, develop useful measures to allow the EMS community to measure the things that we think are really important related to the care of patients. So, so one of the things that is our responsibility, and today we'll be talking about it a little bit more, is if you go to the next slide, is really, this is the kind of the foundation of our work, which are these current the NEMSQA measures, the national measure set. We are going to be working on that today, and we're going to get into the very specific details. I mean, we're committed to making sure that we're doing this right from a technical perspective, that we are making sure that the measures reflect what we want. We found a lot of challenges around data quality and ensuring that again, when we kind of build on the NEMSIS measure set, that the things that we're asking the data to look at are actually what we wanted to look at. So I'm gonna turn it over to Jeff Jarvis, and I would just say we're going to kind of come back to this at the end, but we're committed to developing a robust partnership with EMS organizations throughout the country. We are going to be opening a membership for individuals, for organizations, and beyond. And we'd love to, this is obviously a committed group of people who care about this topic. We'd love to have you as partners and members to the organization. More to come on that as we kind of roll our membership, back. I could say, I don't know what to call it, but the infrastructure in the next few months. So look out for that. But really happy to have you all here today. I know there's a lot of folks who do a lot of work in the EMS space, and it's great to have you all and get your input on the work that we're doing. So without further ado, Jeff, I'm going to turn it over to you to take us through the NEMSQA updates, and thanks so much for your leadership on this.
Michael, thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and thank you for that for the great overview of where we've been and what we have to look forward to. I'm really excited. You had a list of our measures up there, and what I'm excited about those measures, but I'm really excited about the opportunity to expand that list and look at new areas for us to improve so that we can continue improving quality care throughout the country. And really that is what our goal is to do, is refine these measures as whether the documentation changes or we find new ways to improve the measures. And as long as we can make sure that our measures are accurately measuring performance, we can use that as a benchmark to improve clinical performance. And that's our goal at the end of the day. With that in mind, what I'd like to do is just kind of get into some of the nuts and bolts about our annual update. So when we have measures, we have to maintain those measures. There are things that change in the baseline data that can throw off our measures, and we have a responsibility to make sure that we stay on top of those and adjust the pseudocode or some of the things that we're looking at in the measures to make sure that we're reflecting current practice. So what we're talking about here is not particularly new measures. It is the maintenance on the existing measures. And we're going to break these down into roughly two groups. We're going to talk about the things that we have decided as NEMSQA is a better representation for the industry. So those are our internal updates. And then there are some structural updates, essentially NEMSIS updates, that we needed to change so that we stay on top of the, or we stay in compliance, I guess. We measure, boy, what is the word I'm looking for here? When the data set changes, we want to make sure our measure changes. That's exactly what I was saying. So why don't we start going through these, Sheree, if you don't mind? So the first thing that I want to talk about is a global change, and this has to do with pediatrics. Our pediatric partners were really influential in the early lifespan of NEMSIS, and we wanted to make sure that we had some measures that specifically looked at pediatrics, since they're an important part of what we do. So we had three very specific measures that looked at peds, and then the remaining measures that were adults. Well, one of the things that we've wanted to do is expand out those pediatric measures. But when looking at the measures, it turns out that the measures we're looking at for adults also apply to pediatrics and vice versa. So with almost all of our measures, there's one example or one exception to this, we have stratified the measure by age group. So we've taken, let's take trauma, for example, and we have broken this down into the adult population, which we define as 18 or greater, and the pediatric population, which is less than 18. So we are now looking at every measure as an adult and a pediatric measure. The one exception to this is the stroke 01. And the reason we did not do this, it's not because we don't think kids have strokes. They certainly do, and far too often for anybody's comfort. But the typical approach or the typical type of stroke and etiology of stroke is different in kids than it is in adults. And thankfully, the numbers are very, very small. So when you're dealing with a data set and you're trying to validate measures, one of the things that you need is numbers. And even in a national data set, the numbers of pediatric strokes is going to be very, very small, and that's going to make it really difficult to validate these measures. So for that reason, stroke 01 remains an adult-only measure, but all of the other measures have been stratified into peds and adults. Now, I think that's a good thing because it's expanding out pediatric measures. But if you were to just look on the surface, which I think is probably a bad thing no matter what we're talking about, you would see that where we had in the name of the measure 3 dedicated pediatric measures, we now only have 1. And the reason for that is we just wanted to be more inclusive and expand out the number of pediatric measures. So if you're just looking at what we call these, please remember that we're not decreasing pediatric measures. We're not getting rid of pediatric measures. We're actually expanding out pediatric measures across the board. And we're doing this in large part because our pediatric colleagues have asked us to expand this out. So that's what we're doing. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide, if you don't mind. So we've made some global updates across the board. One of the things we have done, and you see an image here that is basically a screenshot from our technical release document, and this is how we define a measure. Now, there's a lot more that goes into the measure, particularly the pseudocode and the explanation for how we got there, and all of that is available on our website. But this is a sort of an executive summary, if you will, of what the measure is. We added a row to this that describes the initial population, and we're doing this just basically to be more explicit about what the measure is. The more explicit we are about what we're measuring, we think the more reliable the measures will be regardless of who is using them. So initial population, that's there for everybody now, and we've done that for each measure. The next is where we look at the denominator. We now have denominator statement, and that is stratified into the populations that we're looking at. So you'll see population number 1, and that is the overall measure. And then you'll see the stratifications, population 2, which is the adult group, and population 3, which is the pediatric group. And again, we're using 18 as our cutoff period. So we're using those groups for all but 3 of the measures. So the stroke one we talked about before is adult only. Then the asthma measure is from 2 and above. So the pediatric group is 2 to 17, and the adult group is still greater than 18. And the reason we're doing that is, again, at the request and the feedback from our pediatricians, they're pointing out that in the 0 to 2 age group, things that are wheezing and seeming asthma-like are probably not, and therefore we're probably measuring something else. And bronchiolitis is one of the things that is at the top of that list. And bronchiolitis, the beta agonist, which is what this measure is looking at, that's not really the standard of treatment. So we're trying to look at just those things where bronchospasm and inhaled or nebulized bronchodilators are the correct treatment. So we did that. And then the pediatric 03, which is the weight-based one, is still a pediatric only measure. All right, so that is the global update on how we're doing the initial update or initial population and denominators. Let's go to the next slide, please, ma'am. So we have some renamed measures. So PEDS 01 is the PEDS respiratory assessment. That is broad bucket where everybody with a 911 call with some type of respiratory disorder is in there. And we wanted to see that we got an SpO2 and respiratory rate. That was initially a PEDS only. We've expanded it out now. And if we're looking at adults, it would be kind of silly to call it a PEDS measure. So we're now calling it a respiratory measure. So that's now respiratory 01. And again, just to be clear, we're still giving the same number that we were before, just within a stratification. We're just expanding this out. PEDS 02, which is administration of an inhaled beta agonist for asthma, is now just asthma 02. And then the final one, we tweaked a little bit, and we're going to talk about that because it's a pretty technical, nerdy sort of discussion. We made some changes to it, and to notify or to basically indicate that change, we're now calling it PEDS 03B. And that B just means that there's been a change to it. Let's go to the next slide, please, ma'am. All right, so let's talk about that change. So this is the nerdy part of our discussion. So if you look at PEDS 03, this is the executive summary of what this measure was, and then down over on the right is the 3B. Initially, what we're looking at is 911 calls to a child 18 or younger than 18 who received a weight-based medication. So that was the denominator. And then in the numerator was those patients who had a weight documented. Well, our goal here is to encourage documentation measurement and documentation of a weight for children. When we started this off, we were very, very specific about we want to take the most obvious case, which is there is no way you can argue that a child receiving a weight-based medication should have a weight measured and documented. That's where we started. But because we said we're only including those patients who had a weight-based medication in the denominator, if you documented a weight, even though you didn't give a weight-based medication, you didn't get credit for that. So we're trying to expand that out a little bit. And now what we're doing is saying our population is 911 responses less than 18 years of age who received a medication. And then that way, that's our denominator. If you gave an albuterol treatment, for example, a non-weight-based medication, before you would not have received credit for it, you would not have you would have been excluded altogether. Now you're left in, and that call counts toward the numerator. However, you are excluded if you don't document a weight and the medication you gave is non-weight based. So we are including it out. So essentially you get credit for doing it when it wasn't a weight-based medication, but you're not being penalized for not doing it if it was a non-weight-based education or medication. So we think that's the best way to go with this. So that's the change that we've made. Let's move on to the next slide. All right, so some slight tweaks to some of the other measures, and we're just going to go through each of these measures here. Hypoglycemia 01, we're capturing those patients who are hypoglycemic and have altered mental status and looking for whether we're doing something about this. Well, Josh with NEMSIS identified an ICD code that we were not initially including. And that's other specified diabetes mellitus with hypoglycemia. So we wanted to include that in our list, in the pseudocode list, so that we're capturing those folks also. And while I'm on that subject about Josh, I really can't say enough thanks to Josh and Clayman from NEMSIS. They obviously know this data set better than anybody does, and they've been instrumental in helping us make sure that we are matching these measures to the data set in the best way possible. So thank you very much to Josh and Clay. So thank you very much. So hypoglycemia, we've added in one additional thing for the included population. Let's go to the next slide. Respiratory 01, remember this was the measure formerly known as Pediatrics 01. We did the same thing with this. There's another ICD-10 code. This is respiratory disorder unspecified. We added that in. So that's really the only change there. Let's go to the next slide. So we also had to make some changes based on changes to the new standards, the 3.5 NEMSIS standard. So let's take a look at those. So this deals primarily with type of service. And this is since most of our measures, if not all of our measures, are 911 responses, we have to define what a 911 response is. And that is listed in the E-Response 05 code, which is type of service requested. Well, the value list has changed. At the top of this, you see the old list. At the bottom, you see the new list. So each of the values that were there in the old list are still represented in the new list. They may have been, the name may have been changed a bit. For example, mutual aid is now, the title is now emergency response mutual aid, but they're all still there. And there are some additional values, and these get into things that aren't really 911 calls. So they're not included in our measures, but the point of NEMSIS expanding it was to capture more data. So those are the new values, and because of that, we needed to change what the code in our measures were. So let's go to the next slide. So what does that look like? When we set our definition of what a 911 response was before, was basically limited to this code, the 220-5001, and that's a 911 response to scene. Well, that's been expanded out. So now we're including one of three values, the 01, 03, or 09 response, and you can see those there. They're all emergency response, just different types of emergency response. So we just want to make sure that we're not missing something there. All right, let's go to the next one. So some of our measures are only looking at patients who were transported, and the definition, the data set here changed as well. So in the old version, we had e-disposition 12, which was the incident and patient disposition. That value has now been dropped from 3.5.0, and it has been replaced or added on, replaced with e-disposition 28 and e-disposition 30. So our definition of a transport has to change. Our definition was looking at e-disposition 12, patient treated, transported by this EMS unit. And in the new nomenclature, we're looking at a composite. So you have to have patient evaluated and care provided under e-disposition 28, and you have to have one of these four options or one of these four codes in e-disposition 30. So patient evaluated and care provided, and they were transported. And that's where we have this. All right, so our update there. Let's go to the next slide. So this is an example of the pseudocode that we have for each measure, and you'll see how that change we were just talking about with the transport code is reflected in the pseudocode. So when you're looking at that executive summary, if you're looking at our measurement description on our website, initially there is plain English that describes how we got to where we are. Then you have what I'm calling the executive summary, and then you have the pseudocode. And this is where nerds live. So as you look through, this is where those of us who really enjoy this kind of nerdy thing get the meat and potatoes. And this is just how it's reflected in the pseudocode. All right, let's go to the next slide, please. So the hypoglycemia that we mentioned, that was because we wanted to be more inclusive. Well, it turns out there was also a change to the NEMSIS standard, and that deals with how we are reporting blood glucose. So for eVitals 18, which is the blood glucose level, it used to be essentially a numeric code, so you put in the value. The new update includes values for low or high, and since we're looking for hypoglycemia, we wanted to be sure to capture it if it said low. So that is in there. Let's go to the next slide. So the last thing I wanted to hit on is some of the support resources, and this is basically the technical document that is available. These are the release notes. This is essentially the change log in software terms. So for folks who are creating these measures, writing software to provide these measures for their customers, this is the place to go. And this just goes through in painful detail for every measure. And we're just as explicit as we possibly can be about what the change was. And this particular slide is just looking at these global updates. So you'll see these values on each one of these measure changes, again, because they're global updates. All right, let's go to the next slide. So the last thing we want to do is talk about, that's what we've done in terms of maintenance. So let's wrap up and take a look at where we're going in the future. All righty, next slide. So something we have going on right now is we're working with the American College of Surgeons Committee on Trauma. They worked with the CDC in 2011 to put out the trauma triage guidelines. And these are the guidelines that give you an idea of, based on the severity of your patient's illness, where you should take them. So hurt people should go to hurt people facilities. Well, they are changing those. They're updating, they're modifying them, and they are simplifying them. And because of that, the criteria for who should go to different levels of trauma centers is going to be changed from the old measure. We needed to update that. They've asked us to do that. We're in the process of updating it and producing some additional measures. And then
Jeff,
I think just
can I just comment on that, if you don't mind?
Yeah, please, Michael.
No, I was going to say that I know as an EMS medical director, it's always been hard to identify trauma patients well, and at least some for me. Maybe it's me, but I think the work that we're doing here not only helps us kind of align with the national standard around trauma transport, but it helps kind of give us a better tool of who is a true trauma patient versus not. And I think that, even that kind of basic work will help folks across the country to identify trauma in their system and understand how they're doing with taking care of those patients. So just a side note.
You bet. Well, Michael, do you want to talk about where we're going next, or would you like me to talk about that?
Go for it, Jeff. Sorry.
Oh, no worries. No, you have great insight into this, and you have some great insight into some of the projects we're going on and taking a look at. So let's just talk about this in terms of future measures. One of the things we all know that there are lots of measures out there. A lot of states have measures. California, Washington have measures out there. Utah has some measures. There are other organizations. Gamut has some. And then obviously there are the associations, and we have AHA out there like Mission Lifeline. So we want to go out as we're looking at expanding our list of measures, and this is for the nerd in me, this is the fun thing to do. We want to see what's out there. So if there is a measure, let's just say hypothetically, an organization that was concerned with care of, say, the heart, might have a measure that looks at the administration of aspirin to patients with non-traumatic chest pain. Just hypothetically saying they might have that measure. And if so, and they've already done the work to define it, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for us to redo that. We would work with them to either adopt that measure or to harmonize it and modify it just a bit. So we're looking at where all of the measures are that are out there right now, and then we're identifying which of those measures we think would be a good fit for NEMSQA. And as we do that and define those, then we'll move forward with either creating a brand new measure or adopting or harmonizing someone else's measure. At the same time, we're also, we have to, on an ongoing basis, keep up our measures. So we'll keep doing what we just talked about. And then the final thing is we want to do a gap analysis and essentially look at the measures we have and then look at practice and say what gaps are out there. And this is one of those things that is really important for all of our partners. We want to make sure we get input from all of our partner organizations, whether it is a geriatric measure or a pediatric measure, an endocrine measure, whatever the measure set is, we want to make sure that we're representing the entire scope of medicine. So that's really what I have for you, where we're going with our measures.
Just one last thing related to that,
yeah,
Jeff,
yeah, please.
Also with, I think with an eye towards the evidence, our partners at Pre-Hospital Guidelines Consortium, we have been increasingly working with our partners there to, ensure that, one, we're using the most up-to-date evidence for the development of measures. We're not creating measures that are counter the current evidence in practice. I think, there's a lot of national efforts in other areas and spaces. So the national guidelines around education and certification. These are things that we're conscientious of. Our partners bring to the table, and we want to we'll make sure that we're not kind of working against these spaces. So, but no, you well said, Jeff, and really thanks for taking us through the details of all of these measures and the next steps. So, so in terms of, let's just why don't we do this? Why don't we open it up? I know there's probably a lot of questions that people are thinking about. There's a lot of smart people on this call who have a lot of experience in this space. So if there's anything that's, we want your input, again, as we kind of think through each of these measures, and we want to make sure that it's clear for you about why we're doing what we're doing.
Hey, this is Josh Legler. I'll kick it off with a couple of questions. One, you mentioned the field triage guidelines update. Do you know when that is going to be published by CDC?
Yeah, so I'm not 100% sure. The committee has, at least in our kind of the interface between our NEMSQA group and the American College of Surgeons, it sounds like they're getting closer and closer. I know it's been a long time since we had the last ones. I think everybody's pretty excited to get the guidance out. I'm hoping that we can wrap the measures that are associated with it into the rollout of the guideline itself. So, I can't speak to exactly when, but it seems like it's really coming soon.
Okay, thanks.
I think as far as just the estimated timeline, I think the final guidelines and the measures are due to be finished in March. So I'm not sure that the time frame from submission to publication, if you will, but if that gives you an idea of a timeline, that's the best I can do.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thanks. And then my second question is kind of related. For these measure updates that we just covered, when will those be available on the NEMSQA website?
Tomorrow.
Great.
I wanted to do this first so that nobody could get the sneak peek.
Great. Are there any other questions out there?
Hi, my name is Charles Dunn. I just wanted to know if you guys have had any success using the e-outcome 10 and 13 data points for the ER and hospital diagnosis for your measures.
So I'll address that a little bit, and then I actually would like to turn that over to Josh, because I think he understands the data set a little better than I do. None of our measures that we currently have look at those outcomes as part of the, I almost did it again. I always have conflated Florida and FAIR and always call these the FLAIR measures, but the Florida FAIR measure project does look at some outcomes. They're using a state-specific data set with a different outcome table. So we have the potential, as we're expanding this out, to look at some outcomes, but we have not done it yet, Charles, so I don't have any great experience using the data in the NEMSIS set. With that in mind, though, I would like to ask Josh to comment on it. What is the, do you know how much data is in there? How many of our records actually have that?
Well, historically, that's been the problem. The outcomes section has been mostly empty, and now we're starting to see more integrations with hospital systems where we're getting outcome data coming back in an automated fashion. NEMSIS 3.5 is going to take that further by making all of the outcome elements, not all of them, but the ED and hospital diagnosis and many other outcome elements are now national elements, and that will kind of strengthen the priority and emphasis on getting those integrations in place and getting that data collected. So we're hoping to see more systems collecting that outcome data. Once you've got some pretty good completeness, you can start making some measures using that data.
Thank you very much. And do you know if any of the current health data exchanges, like ESO's health data exchange, is able to export that data into the NEMSIS database?
I don't know that I could speak specifically to specific products, but what I can say is that the NEMSIS standard defines those data elements. And today they would not go to the national database because they're not labeled as national elements. But in NEMSIS 3.5, they are labeled as national elements. And so the support will be there for, if that system has collected that data, then it should send that data to the state and to the national database.
Thank you very much.
Charles, great question, man. Thank you for answering that or asking that. And I appreciate the help, Josh.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just as we think about future development, I mean, this opens another, a whole kind of space of measure development that crosses the hospital door. I think that's something we'll be paying attention to and, looking forward to. Like, right, that's the kind of the dream scenario where we can take out the work that we do in EMS and connect it to the outcomes of the patients in the hospital. So again, the question brings up a lot of great issues and ideas.
It does, and it's very exciting. That of the types of measures, the structure, the process, the outcome, the balancing measures, outcomes are the one we care most about, but they're also the most difficult to measure. And one of the criticisms of most existing measures is, well, you're measuring things that don't matter. Well, if we can't, like right now, we're just not able to measure outcomes, we really shouldn't let perfection be the enemy of good. So we need to focus where we can and build up this base and this experience base of measurement, and then work really hard to get that outcome data so that we'll be able to take advantage of it. But boy, that is just so exciting that it is coming. And as soon as it does, we can start taking a look at the accuracy of our diagnoses, you know, the outcomes. Are we making a difference in our patients? That's incredibly important, and it's incredibly exciting.
And I'll add another potential area for development, and this may or may not be in the scope of NEMSQA, is data system performance measures. So if an EMS agency wants to have a performance measure that relies on, say, hospital diagnosis, then the question they also need, or what they also need to track, is how often are we getting hospital diagnoses? Because that provides context for their more clinical measure of, you know, what were the diagnoses. And in my work with the state of Oregon, we've implemented a couple of the NEMSQA performance measures. And in tandem with those, we defined data system performance measures. Like on the lights and sirens ones, we wanted to know not only how often were they going no lights and sirens, but also how often did they even record anything for that data element to give us that context.
Yep, really important. This is one of the items that came up in the Florida Fair measures as a next step. Is we really want to start looking at ways to evaluate the quality of the data. Great point, Josh.
Great. Any other questions or thoughts about the current measures and the updates? Okay. Well, listen, please feel free to type anything into the chat, and we will. I think there's just a few more slides. We want to thank our corporate partners. So First Watch and ESO who have joined us and can contribute expertise and support for the organization. We again, as I mentioned in the beginning, we're going to be improving the infrastructure for partnership and for membership, look out for information about how to join as an individual, as a small organization, or as a large organization. So, again, we've traditionally been focused on partners who are in the, who are national organizations, but I think we've thought that it's important to really get insight from all communities in EMS. So please do reach out to us for when that membership becomes open to all of you. Cherie or Kelly, is there anything that we're missing that we haven't touched on that we need to?
I'd say we covered it.
Great. And so Jeff, I really appreciate your work on this. Thanks for presenting with me today. And I'm going to give people a few minutes back into their day to finish up whatever they need to do. So thank you all again, and I look forward to seeing you in the near future. And Happy New Year, happy holidays, and all the best. Stay safe.
Take care, y'all. Happy holidays.